Georgia's orbit that involves Kirby Smart. I'll give you a couple of quick examples here as a way of bolstering my point. Think about Paul Johnson for a moment. A lot of us assume that Kirby doesn't like Tech, and Kirby specifically didn't like Paul Johnson. In fact, if you want to go back to during the Johnson era, I forget what year this was, like 2018, something like that. If you want to go back specifically to that era, Kirby did something publicly he doesn't do a lot. He kind of openly talked about the chance of getting a coach fired because of how bad he was going to beat him. And this is the kind of thing that kind of serves as, hey, if you're not one of Kirby's boys, if you're not a guy that Kirby Smart likes, if you're standing in his way, then you may just get steamrolled, including Paul Johnson. Here's a reminder from, I think this was 2018. Take a listen to this.
Do you view it as like a necessary evil, or do you guys just kind of take it for what it is?
It is what it is. I don't love it, but it is what it is. And you get the cards we're dealt, and that's the cards we're dealt. I mean, if you don't want to play against it, then beat them every year, and eventually you won't have to. So.
If you don't want to play against that triple option offense, then beat them badly enough, and eventually you won't have to. Well, come to find out that's exactly what did happen. Johnson eventually got fired, and Kirby essentially called his shot on that going into that game. An example of being a coach that draws Kirby's ire not being a very good thing to do. And then last year after the Florida game, now you got to understand something. The context here is that Dan Mullen was getting raked over the coals down in Florida by his own media, his own fans, about his inability to recruit and his kind of shrugging off of all of that. This was the weapon that was being used against Mullen to suggest that he should no longer be Florida coach. And it certainly seems like Kirby Smart was aware of that when asked after the game about his own recruiting success. Man, listen to the way last November he just really twisted that knife about what he was doing, what Dan Mullen thought he was doing, and how Mullen had kind of made all the wrong choices. This was Kirby once again kind of having it out for one of his coaching enemies. Take a listen to this. Do we have that? All right, we don't have that. It doesn't matter. So when you play that audio and you hear that Kirby talking about, oh yeah, listen, people want to talk about being a good coach, whatever else. This comes about recruiting, and he really kind of hammered that point home. The point is given a chance to give Mullen a lifeline, given a chance to maybe not lean into the narrative that was being used against Mullen. No, Kirby Smart didn't do that at all. He absolutely kind of twisted the knife there on that. Being an enemy to Kirby Smart is not a place you want to be. Previous coaches have found that out. Eli Drinkwitz, did he make himself an enemy in Kirby Smart by, leaving it hanging after the Papa shot make and putting out the video celebrating Luther Burden? We don't know that for sure necessarily, but it is interesting to consider. Late in this game, maybe a little extra motivation for UGA, maybe reason for Georgia fans to stay focused, find an enemy in Drinkwitz, a guy that you otherwise might not think much about. Hey, whatever works to make Saturday's game more interesting. That's what we believe around here anyway. All right, my name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Apparently our audio is down for right now, and I'm happy to have you with us. Even though the song's not playing, we're still happy to have you with us, whether you check in on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, or on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or available as a podcast wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, worldfamousdawgnation.com, all kinds of ways to connect with our show. We just want to make it as possible for you to be a part of our show as we can. And great sponsors allow us to do that, like our friends at Meriwether and Tharp. They are your source for Georgia divorce. And I realize that divorce is one of those things. I mean, sometimes people even come up to me and they're like, BA, talk about divorce on Thursdays on the show. And I always say, yeah, that is what I talk about. Because here's what I understand, is that while our show is really about having fun and celebrating a topic that we all enjoy discussing, people bring their real lives into our show when they're listening to it or when they connect with us, whatever else. They are bringing their real lives with them. And for real people, divorce is a real part of so many folks' story. And here's what I truly believe, that there are some things in life that you only get better for going through it, that avoiding it, if it's an unnecessary reality, avoiding it, attempting to avoid it, is only prolonging the inevitable on that. That when it's time to get busy and make the decision about putting yourself in a position for a happier tomorrow, then having a strong advocate like Meriwether and Tharp on your side as you go through that divorce process, that is a really important thing. People who understand the law. There are so many things, and I've had lunch with Bob Tharp from Meriwether and Tharp many times, and we've kind of talked about some of this kind of stuff. There are so many things about the law when it comes to divorce that's not necessarily intuitive. Some things you might think are true, but maybe actually in reality something different is actually of a greater benefit to you. And those are the kinds of things I'm not even really smart enough to explain, nor even smart enough to even appreciate necessarily. But the folks at Meriwether and Tharp are certainly capable of doing that, and they are really good at walking you through every option and putting a game plan in place that gives you a great chance at a happier tomorrow, much more enjoyable next season of life than the one you may currently find yourself in. So that's why my advice to you is to reach out to them. They are the AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. That's their website. Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at the AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. Let them walk through everything that's going on with you on all of that. And I think they're going to be a great advocate by your side. So make sure you check them out today. Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at the AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. All right, a couple of notes here I want to give you here, and then we're going to kind of roll through. So we have two great guests today. Before we're done, we'll hear from Connor Riley. We'll do a Kroger Fresh Take with him. Connor, normally on Tuesdays, we had two great guests on Tuesday. Connor was good enough to kind of move to Thursday here today. So we'll do a very rare late week conversation with Connor, but it's actually going to work out to be a really good one today, just because it'll be our chance to kind of find out how it's gone in Athens this week as Georgia gets ready to go on the road in SEC play again on Saturday. Also coming up in a couple of minutes, we're going to talk to Terrence Edwards, great former Georgia wide receiver. Always terrific to have Terrence as a part of what we're doing here on DawgNation Daily. Big insight from him on the focus needed for the next stretch. Georgia has 7 SEC opponents to play coming up over the next 8 weeks. A lot about where Georgia kind of stands in this postseason race will be determined by what happens over the course of the next couple of months, and it starts Saturday at Missouri. And Terrence Edwards will help shape that conversation for us here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at ServPro. And Georgia's number 1. Georgia's riding high. The last time Georgia was in SEC play, it was dominating South Carolina. Georgia sent a big message week 1 when it dominated Oregon and Atlanta. And yet, even in the midst of those very impressive performances, there are a couple of things for Georgia that seem to be kind of a lingering concern. And one of these, and Kirby Smart openly acknowledged that this week, that one of their big goals coming into the season was to find more touchdowns when they entered the red zone. Don't settle for quite as many field goals. This was an area last year that Georgia was right about national average in, somewhere in like the 60s nationally when it comes to percentage of trips into the red zone from the 20 and in that resulted in touchdowns. They were tied with like Tulane, for instance. That's an area in which you don't really want to be if you're Georgia, kind of down there with the likes of Tulane. And Kirby Smart said this week, coming into the year, we clearly wanted to be better at that. And thus far, maybe the results are mixed. Maybe that Georgia, it appears, still has some work to do in taking full advantage of its red zone opportunities, those scoring trips that travel inside the 20-yard line. So Smart was asked, hey, diagnose this. Give us your assessment of what you think is going on with your team once you get down to the red zone. And I thought Smart gave a pretty interesting answer to that earlier this week. Audio's fixed now. You can hear this. This is Kirby on what he sees happening when Georgia gets to the red zone.
You know, it goes back a little bit to the run game. I think when the field tightens up and shrinks, you know, that's where the run game is more glaring because the box is, you know, they're tighter to the box. And there's less people in the deep parts of the field. They're in your front yard, and you got to block them. You got to run through them. And, you know, some of them are just misses. You go back to the Sanford game where we struggled. There was a couple times we had guys open. We just missed them. So we got to do a better job. We've looked at it really hard. You know, first down, run percentage, second down, run percentage, third down conversions in the red area are critical because it gets you a new set of downs. We've been there a lot, but we haven't converted as much as we need to. And if it all had to boil down to one thing, I would say, you know, accuracy in the passing game and being effective running the ball into heavy boxes.
So if you're curious, right now Georgia's 66th nationally in percentage of red zone trips that result in touchdown. That's an area in which an otherwise elite team is not elite. That's why Smart speaks so openly about wanting to correct that, because that's obviously one of those areas in which you can find more points if you take full advantage of those scoring opportunities. But here's kind of something I think that also needs to be acknowledged there as well. The red zone's a little bit of a weird thing. It's kind of a made-up designation. Like, who decided the red zone was the 20? Why isn't it the 25? Why isn't it the 15? It's sort of this sort of made-up designation, and there, because of that, it can be a little bit hard to know exactly what red zone success means, or in some cases, what lack of red zone success means. I want to give you kind of an example that proves this point. If you look at the 5 highest scoring teams in the country right now, Oklahoma State, Michigan, Ohio State, Kansas, and Tennessee, believe it or not, Kansas is in that group right now. If you look at the 5 highest scoring teams in the country, you don't necessarily always see the same correlation with red zone success. And for instance, Oklahoma State, number 1, but they're just 14th in the red zone when it comes to percentage of trips resulting in touchdown. Michigan is 2nd, but they're just 29th when it comes to red zone touchdown percentage. Ohio State is 4th, so a little bit of correlation there. Kansas just 17th, and Tennessee just 9th. So in other words, that there's a little bit of an imbalance in some cases, especially with Michigan, for instance, 2nd scoring overall, but just 29th in red zone. A little bit of a disconnect between how well offenses perform at large compared to how well offenses perform when they get down there to the smaller field. Now, I'll also point this out, that if you look at the high water mark for SEC offenses the last few years, LSU in 2019, Alabama in 2020, those teams were not only the best scoring teams, but they were also the best red zone teams there as well. So it's not always a disconnect between what you think of one, what you think of the other. And for Georgia, when you think about how they could have had even more offense last year, clearly more red zone success is an example of that. But as I told Mike Griffith when he joined us on the show yesterday, while I love the fact that Kirby is openly acknowledging this as an area in which UGA needs improvement, as someone who knows far less about this topic than he does, just kind of giving you my opinion as someone who tries to watch these games as closely as I can, I think that his diagnosis of this is not quite what I think it should be. He talks a lot about running the ball in what he calls, kind of big boxes down there with, extra defenders. And the reason why there are more defenders is because there's not as much stuff for the defense to worry about over its head. The field has gotten smaller, and therefore with the field smaller, more defenders crouching towards the line of scrimmage, and therefore running the football becomes a little bit more difficult to do. And in those scenarios during the Kirby Smart era at Georgia, that just hasn't always worked out well for UGA. I want to give you another stat here. And this isn't a stat about red zone necessarily, but it is a stat that speaks to, even though Georgia typically almost always has a very good offensive line and almost always typically has a great stable of running backs, when it comes to short yardage situations, when the defense is very likely assured of what Georgia's going to try to do, run the football, Georgia hasn't always found success there in that regard. There's a website called Football Outsiders. They're kind of an analytics-based website. One of the things they keep tab of is what they call power success rate on running plays, and that may sound fancy, but here's all it means. That when you run the ball on 3rd or 4th down with 2 yards to go for a first down or a touchdown, how successful are you on those rushing plays? Now, as I said before, Georgia almost always has very good offensive line, almost always has very good running backs. You would think on those power running plays, short yardage plays to convert first downs and touchdowns, that Georgia would be great at that. But history tells us not so much. In 2017, Georgia was just 47th in those kinds of plays. In 2018, just 33rd. In 2019, just 41st nationally. In 2020, just 47th nationally. And last year, even in a national championship season, outside the top 50 when it comes to power success rate, converting running plays of 2 yards or less into first downs or touchdowns. That's why I'm so adamant that the solution to whatever's plaguing Georgia in the red zone is not going to be just jam it in there and try to run it against 8-man boxes. When the defense knows what's coming, it's just simply easier to stop it. So for Georgia to solve its red zone woes, I believe, to the extent they even are woes, but for Georgia to kind of correct whatever issue might exist in the red zone, I don't think you're going to do it with power football. I do think that Georgia needs the power running element more so in its game plan this year. But for me, that's more about the full field and not just inside the 20. Down inside the 20, it's actually the other thing that Smart said that's probably true here, that those are the moments in which you need the best possible performance from Stetson Bennett. The most accurate throws he can make. Think about the Darnell Washington touchdown attempt in Samford when that ball was probably a little overthrown, probably a little too much mustard on it, and Washington wasn't able to come down with it. That's a touchdown that Georgia could have had with a slightly better throw, and that's where you need Bennett at his best. Now, I'll also add to this there too. Then we talked with Mike Griffith about this yesterday. I thought he brought up a really good point, that while, traditional runs don't always serve you well inside the 20 because it's easier for the defense to stop them. Quarterback runs have proven to be very dangerous inside the red zone. In fact, one of the things you've probably seen is the stat that's been kind of compiling for Bennett thus far this year, games in which he's had more than 250 yards passing while also having a rushing touchdown, something that I think that only Tim Tebow has done through 4 games in SEC history. That's the kind of success that you're getting from Bennett right now. And when you think about where his value as a runner shows up, maybe more so than anything else, it's right there in the red zone, because quarterback runs are the kinds of things, unlike traditional runs, that you don't necessarily know when they're coming, and therefore they become much more efficient and much more difficult to stop. So we already know that Georgia's leaning on Bennett a good bit this year. He's had a very good start to his season. But down in the red zone, I believe that Georgia's going to have to lean on him a little bit more. If you want more red zone success, you need very accurate throws from Stetson when you're down there, and you need his legs, because the traditional runs just have a tendency not to work so well when you're down there in the short part of the field. That is Around the Doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at Serve Pro. And speaking of things that work, we know Serve Pro works around here because they've worked for us. I'm talking about big cleanup jobs. You've heard me talking before when it comes to Serve Pro about fire damage, water intrusion, and the fix-up they're capable of doing. Well, if you're watching on video, you see another example of our building and how it just got completely wrecked a couple of weeks ago by a water leak. There was like a coffee machine or something like that just, one of those fancy coffee machines, and I know water just leaked everywhere, and it was going to destroy the entirety of the floor, if not the entirety of the building. And then it was prevented. Our producer, Michael Carvell, kind of stepped in and stopped that, and then reached out and got to our friends at Serve Pro, and all of a sudden they're here. And the cleanup job that you're seeing there is actually a couple of weeks old. We should actually maybe shoot some new video of how it looks outside of our building now, because it is absolutely perfect. I mean, it has been completely renovated. We've told you before that Serve Pro cleans it up like it never even happened, and that's exactly what they've done for us. They can do that for you there as well. Plus, each and every franchise independently owned and operated. That means you're doing business with someone who's got a stake in the outcome just like you do. So find out more. ServePro.com, that's the website. ServePro.com, SERV. Check out ServePro.com for a lot more on that. All right, I'm glad to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp today. We've got Connor Riley here coming up in just a few minutes' time. A lot to discuss with him. But before that, Georgia on the road in SEC play. This is a place, I'm talking about these kinds of games, road games, where Georgia has seemingly had an extra level of focus. How come that's true? Let's talk to a guy who's also won plenty of games on the road during his football career. It's the former Georgia wide receiver, Terrence Edwards. This is a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So let's say hello to Terrence Edwards here, great former Dog, record-setting wide receiver, and a great voice, breaking down everything related to UGA. And Terrence, I've told you this before, that your senior year in 2002, one of my favorite Georgia teams of all time, and one of the things that made that team so enjoyable were big road wins. You can think about the South Carolina game and the David Pollock strip sack touchdown that kind of helped make that possible. You guys won in Alabama that year. That wasn't a Nick Saban Alabama. It's still a pretty big deal to win at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and it was a fun, thrilling game. You won there. At Auburn to clinch the SEC East for the first time in program history, and obviously the Michael Johnson touchdown that was a part of that. Go back to your junior year. You guys just got to win at Tennessee, hobnail boot there in 2001. When you were kind of coming of age as a Georgia player, it was also a time where Georgia was, like it is now, having big-time success on the road in the SEC. What's the mindset necessary for Georgia to do what it's been doing? How do they get so focused when they're going into somebody else's stadium?
It's a mindset that the coaches preach all week. I just can remember, if you was a student at Georgia at the time, especially when we went up to, anytime we went up to Tennessee, we would go to the stadium and there have the Rocky Top playing, and the communications was very poor, so we had to be locked into the hand signals. So they put you in a predicament that your focus has to be laser focused, or you're just not gonna play well because of the crowd. So once you go into somebody else's house, man, you have to go in with the respect of, we got to go in and respect these people's house, but we're going in with a objective to win and beat you in your house. So doesn't matter if it's Missouri or it's Tennessee or it's Auburn, you got to respect someone's house and go in and play your best game.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider update. Kirby's also talked about how, hey, when you travel, maybe it's less family. Not that you don't want to see your family, but that just gives you more of a chance to be focused. It's certainly less like girlfriend interaction, things like that. There's actually a little bit of an ability to prioritize football when you're in another state playing a game in somebody else's stadium. Did you find that to be true as a player, that maybe you could just kind of focus on your business a little bit more because some of the peripheral distractions that happened back at home, you didn't have to worry about those things for that particular week?
Well, in a sense, yes, because now when we play, we didn't have all the devices and FaceTime and do everything that these kids have now. But in an overall grand scheme of things, yes, you don't have that, distractions that these kids have at home. When you playing at home, I don't know what they do. I don't know if they go to the hotel at night or what, but there's a lot of things that you just can get into. And these are young kids, but when you're on the road, you're locked down. Like, you're truly locked down. It's just football. And, it's a sense of urgency when you're out of town. It's definitely a level of, it's a different level of focus once you're out of town because you don't have all the distractions that you normally have on a home game.
So I was talking about the red zone before you joined us here a little bit. I want to tell you a quick story. So, I'm not a former coach. I'm not a former player. I don't pretend to be an expert about what's happening between the white lines. I don't pretend to be that. But I have had a few moments, Terrence, in recent years where when you're watching a game from the field, I think you get a different perspective of like what that area right in front of the goal line sort of looks like. I remember being on the field for the overtime session in the Rose Bowl between Georgia and Oklahoma. And I remember thinking, as a fan who desperately wanted Georgia to win this game, that all of a sudden I wasn't quite so afraid of Baker Mayfield anymore once you got 20 and in, because all of a sudden the Georgia defense just didn't have as much ground to cover. That I kind of got a different perspective from football watching games from down there on the field, because you realize when it's 20-yard line and in, or in overtime 25-yard line and in, when you're on that small field, the defense's job just gets a little bit easier. And the things about the defense for Georgia in 2017 that I liked, Roquan Smith, defensive line, things like that, all of those strengths were kind of accentuated because they just didn't have as much behind them to worry about there. And ever since then, I've sort of thought about the red zone a little bit different as one of those things where, hey, if you're truly a great quarterback, you make your best throws in the red zone. If you're truly a dynamic athlete, you'll make a guy miss in the red zone. And that's an area right now that I think that, stats would say that Georgia needs to get better at. Kirby Smart's kind of acknowledged that there too. As a player yourself, what's your thought on what happens when you get close to scoring and why so many otherwise good offenses seem to fizzle a little bit once they get inside the 20?
On both sides of the ball, your focus and level of concentration heightens, and it's different for both sides. On the offensive side, the field do shrink. If you're in a 20-yard and in, now you only have 30 yards to work with, and that's the 20 plus 10 more yards in the end zone. So as a defensive player, I know you can't beat me but so far. So I could play a little differently if I had 50 yards to cover. So both sides of the ball, it's tougher for offenses to score in the red zone. And I ain't going to say it's easier, but there are more limitations that we have than defense. And defense is going to use the short fields to their defense. So it's totally different. And those teams that score more touchdowns in the red zone usually be your better team.
So one of the other topics that's been going on here a lot, and different people have kind of a different opinion of all this, is, hey, how's it going with the Georgia rushing attack? Now, the numbers actually don't look that bad. Georgia averaged just at 6 yards per carry against South Carolina, had an overall, decent-looking rushing total against Kent State, and had a, fine offensive performance in total when you think about yards and points there. And yet there is still this kind of lingering suspicion that something might not be quite right with the Georgia rushing attack, and maybe that's because the offensive line, maybe in particular interior offensive linemen, guard spots, maybe to really be more specific, maybe they're not having a great season to this point in time. Maybe Georgia running backs aren't quite making people miss the way that they maybe have in the past. Terrence, you're obviously watching these games closely, and you're a sharp football mind. What do you see happening with Georgia on what we'll think of here as traditional running plays, offensive linemen trying to open holes for running backs? What do you see happening there in those moments right now?
Well, I think this game we did a better job against South Carolina and Kent State of moving people off the line of scrimmage. I didn't think the first couple games, even against Sanford, that we didn't move people around. We didn't bully people around. More finesse. We're going to hold the block and allow the running back to pick and choose where he needs to run. But I just think we're not bullying people right now. I think when we had Nick and we had Sony, I think those offensive line under Pitbull that we were able to bully people. And I know the offensive lineman was different with Solomon Kinley and all those guys. They were just bigger. And I think now we're getting more taller, leaner guys, more athletic, and we're just not bullying people off the line of scrimmage. So what are we doing right now? If you look at the stat, we're throwing the ball 2 yards away to Kenny McIntosh and allow him to run 8 to 10 yards. So that is an extension of the running game that we have kind of mastered, because I think Kenny may be leading the team in receptions. So that's in today's game, that's the extension of the running game. And I don't think anyone right now is really running power game between the tackles. They're allowing these ultra-talented running backs and utility backs to get into space and use their talent in the open field more than just trying to pound between the tackles. I think that's the way football is going right now.
Good stuff from Terrence Edwards here in our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Speaking of good stuff, you got a chance to enjoy some good stuff yourself at Marlowe's right now. One more weekend here of the Ribs and Whiskey event, one of the great promotional events that Marlowe's has throughout the year. We love the ribs, love all the special rubs and sauces and the great menu items. By the way, we've got some great sides, because here's my thing. I love barbecue. Most of you do there as well. But down here in Georgia, we're big into like the good sides to go along with the barbecue there too. And they've got some very clever, creative, chef-inspired side dishes to go along with that great ribs and the special barbecue menu items there at Marlowe's Tavern right now, including like fried macaroni and cheese, which is just amazing. You want a great special dessert? How about the bourbon bread pudding? You can get that there as well. Got some really good like cornbread. It's a great experience, a great time for you to enjoy the tavern right there in your neighborhood. And listen, if Marlowe's is doing a big special event, you better believe they're going to have some specialty cocktails to go along with it. That's just what they do. And that's why we love them. And you can stop by and see them today, marlowestavern.com for more on that. Or just go right there to the tavern right there in your neighborhood and enjoy a great, great ribs and whiskey event taking place there at Marlowe's Tavern. Terrence, I want to finish up with this today. So this, to me, is why Saturday's game matters. We've seen 4 games from Georgia thus far this year. In 2 of those games, Georgia has looked like the best team in the country. Oregon game, South Carolina game, I don't know that anyone was capable of playing better on those particular days than Georgia was. Samford, Kent State, both the home games, ironically enough, Georgia has looked less than the best team in the country. Now, it's easy to sort of dismiss that and say, it's level of competition, it's lack of focus, lack of emotion, and for all I know, that's probably true. That probably really is the explanation for why Georgia didn't play that great. But Saturday becomes a 5th data point, and all of a sudden now you've got either more examples of Georgia playing great, or if Georgia sleepwalks, all of a sudden now you've got more examples of Georgia being less than its best than you do the other kind of performance. So to me, Saturday's a little bit interesting in that, is this the Georgia that blows doors against Power 5 competition, or is this the Georgia that kind of seems disinterested when it's not playing a team that's on its same level? I think we actually learn a little bit about these dogs on Saturday, despite the fact that Missouri is about as uninteresting a team as you can possibly play.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to see the team that we expect that we see against Oregon and South Carolina. We keep beating the dead horse, and I've been one as well just to say, they've been unmotivated, uninterested in the teams because they just knew they was better. But this game, even though Missouri is not as talented, I think that they understand what this game represents. It's an SEC game. We need to continue to win every SEC game as possible. I think they're going to go out in a hostile environment in a place where we haven't been have played Missouri. So I think that we're going to get their best. I think Kirby and company have just pounded it into their heads like this is an SEC game. We have to treat it like South Carolina. We have to treat it like this opponent here can't beat us. I think he's kind of scared that into them. I look forward to watching them, and I procrastinate that they're going to be the team that we saw against Oregon and South Carolina.
Terrence, it's great stuff. I appreciate you being here for our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. I know it's a late night on Saturday, but we're looking forward to seeing you a little bit on the DawgNation postgame show there as well. Your thoughts after these games always so valuable. So thanks for being a part of that there, too, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again here next time.
Thanks, B.A. And I want to say this before I go. I want all the DawgNation, wherever you're watching DawgNation, just to tell me how I did when B.A. had technical difficulties.
That's
and
right.
I had to run this show by myself on last Saturday. So I just need everyone to tell me how I did on my debut of running the post-game show.
Honestly, Terrence, I should have brought this up. You knocked it out of the park. I was so impressed. Now, listen, I felt bad to leave you in that position. Obviously, a good partner never, leaves his wingman. In that particular case, I guess I was more of a goose to your maverick because I wasn't there for you when you needed me. But in that particular case, I think that you absolutely you dominated the performance, as we knew you probably would. But for folks who didn't see it on Saturday, things were going really great in the post-game show. We're like 30, 35 minutes in. We're just humming right along. And then out of nowhere, as technology sometimes does, totally betrayed by big tech, Terrence was left by himself. And, Terrence, you picked up the ball, you ran with it, and you scored a touchdown like you did so many times in your Georgia career.
So that's touchdown number 31 for me, and I look forward to this upcoming Saturday.
Terrence, great stuff. Thanks for being here. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten about that, and because it's Saturday seems like 1,000 years ago in the life that we all live, of course. But Terrence did a great job. I mean, here's the thing you understand. It's like doing the thing where you talk by yourself is not a naturally intuitive thing, and I do it all the time, but I'm essentially a robot. Like you just sort of wind me up in the back, and I don't function like a normal human necessarily. So the fact that I speak kind of alone and kind of a monologue type sense for a lot, that's just because my brain is sort of wired weird. But for the average person, that's a very different kind of thing. And yeah, Terrence did that on Saturday, and he did great. And it's one of those things where I'm panicked because I'm trying to get back in, and there's always something going on, right? And part of life is just kind of rolling with the punches on stuff like that. So I'm trying to get back into the broadcast, and we're dealing with all of that. But while Terrence was doing great. So I know y'all love Terrence, and if you want to see Terrence in kind of a little bit of an unfiltered form, kind of an unfettered form without me interrupting him every 5 seconds, you can go back and watch that from Saturday, because I thought that was really good. Let me tell you what else I think is really good. That's cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean and making plans to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship here coming up very soon there as well. Now, you've heard me talk a lot about the DawgNation cruise, and I want you to be there on that. But y'all, here's the thing you also got to understand there too. Is it's time to start thinking about holiday cruises. It's time to start thinking about early 2023 type cruises. For me, I love the football season because, I just am immersed in it. And so many of you kind of are in your own version of that there too, just like as entrenched into it as you possibly can be. But when it's done, I'm done. I'm ready for a break. I'm ready to kind of, work on my winter tan. I'm ready to kind of, get on a great private island like Perfect Day, Coco Cay, or walk the streets of Nassau, go snorkeling, or do something really fun like that. I'm ready to stop by and visit one of those really cool cocktail spots on the ship, probably first and foremost. I'm ready to do all of that. So as you're starting to think about holiday travel, you're starting to think about early 2023, not too soon to start thinking about next year's spring break, summer vacations. I want you thinking about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And when we talk about Royal Caribbean cruises, the person that helps us with all of those, because she was actually specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. Jessica Slater is a great travel agent, but I didn't know Jessica prior to being introduced to her from our friends at Royal Caribbean. They said, hey, you guys need a great special travel agent to book your Royal Caribbean cruises. So here's someone who's an expert in what we do, and that's what Jessica Slater is. You can call her. 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147. She's a real person. She'll pick up the phone, she'll answer, and she'll answer any question you have about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And here's what you should definitely ask her. BA said this DawgNation cruise in April is going to be really fun. Is that true? And she will give you the answer to that. And if you're not quite ready to pick up the phone yet, you just want more details about what we're doing in April on board Independence of the Seas. We showed you our buddy Wiser Dog yesterday, who had his cruise ship with Royal Caribbean parked right next to Independence of the Seas. Go to royaldogs.com. That's the website that she's made specially just for our second ever DawgNation cruise, royaldogs.com. And you can get all the information on that from her there. So royaldogs.com, that's the website. 770-718-9147, that's the phone number for whatever Royal Caribbean cruise vacation you're looking to book, including the second ever cruise with DawgNation coming up this April. Make sure you check that out then. All right, a couple of stories related to the SEC. And by the way, before the show is done, I've also got to take care of some business as it relates to tomorrow, and I meant to do that earlier, and I just forgot to. So let me put a pin in that for right now. But stories as it relates to what's happening around the SEC. So A.J. McCarron is a former Alabama quarterback, now in the media, because all former Alabama quarterbacks must eventually go into the media, it would seem. So this is McCarron's foray into all of this, and he was on one of the podcasts from the website called The Ringer. You may have heard of that. And in the midst of the discussion, McCarron says that he has heard that Brian Harsin, the Auburn coach, has already been told that he is fired. Since McCarron said that, AL.com, big website in the state of Alabama that covers Auburn, has reported that sources close to Auburn say that, no, that's not true. Harsin hasn't been told that. Here's what you know, and we all understand this. A lot of this is about semantics. A lot of this is about who the source is that's talking. Of course, sources close to the Auburn situation are going to try to protect the secrecy of what it is they're trying to do, and all of that. They've got kind of a brand to protect here. If someone's telling the truth on this particular instance, I think it's more likely probably McCarron, because I think even those of us who don't quite have inside sources to the Auburn program, we sort of understand that Harsin's kind of dangling by a string right now. This is one of those things that's a lot bigger deal, to certain reporter types than it is to the average fan. The average fan hears a guy like McCarron say this and say, well, of course that's true. Whether it's been officially talked about or sort of whispered in back rooms, cigar-filled rooms, you sort of have that picture of that. Whatever the actual semantic difference is, of course they've talked about replacing Harsin. Of course they're looking to do that. However, let me just say this real quick. I think there's a little bit of a weird vibe around the game between Auburn and LSU on Saturday. And we'll probably do some of this tomorrow because we generally give our kind of big thoughts in the big games. And while LSU Auburn's not a huge game, neither team is ranked in the top 25 right now. It is at least a little bit of it's a historic rivalry in the SEC. It's a preview of Georgia's next opponent. And I'm telling you right now, there is something about this Auburn-LSU game that just doesn't quite sit right with me. I talked about this earlier this week with all the LSU fans who were up in arms about the fact that their game against Tennessee is 11 a.m. local time because, hey, this is such a big game and they're not getting the big game treatment on all of this. Well, you're on the road in SEC play the week prior to that. Maybe that's where your focus should be. It wasn't that long ago that Auburn was kind of viewed as a little bit of a point spread favorite here in this game. And yeah, Auburn got beaten up badly by Penn State, but the truth is I think that Penn State's probably the best team right now that we're not currently talking about. I think that Penn State's actually making a pretty strong case for itself through the first few weeks of the season. And Penn State won big at Auburn because I think that Penn State actually right now is probably pretty good. Auburn just barely beat Missouri. That's certainly true. But once again, this idea that they're going to lay down and die at home against LSU, they'll probably lose. But Harsin's a done deal. I think he'll eventually get fired. Auburn's a bad team. They're one of the 2 or 3 worst in the entire SEC. But that doesn't mean they're not capable of fighting. And right now, everybody acts like this game on Saturday night is just some sort of like rubber stamp, easy one for LSU. Are we sure LSU's capable of beating anyone of note easily based on how they looked on the first Sunday night of the season against Florida State? Just file that away. It's not an official pick. I'm just saying. Just file that away. Maybe LSU Auburn more worth your attention than currently it's being treated as. I'll also say this really quickly. I saw Rich Scangarello, the Kentucky offensive coordinator, who I think is a big-time downgrade from what Liam Cohen was there a year ago, talking up Will Levis as the future number 1 overall pick. Y'all, for the most part, no, we don't believe that. Levis actually already thrown 4 interceptions this year. I mean, I don't see where the Levis hype comes from. I really don't. But once again, we'll say the same thing about him here we said going into the Florida game. If you're good at all, then you go into Oxford, Mississippi on Saturday against Ole Miss and you have a big game there. And I don't suspect that's going to happen. Because I think one of the sneaky stories in the SEC right now is I just don't think Kentucky's good. I just don't. I don't think they're good. They're ranked. They got a nice, pretty record. I don't think Kentucky is good. But if Levis is good, the way his offensive coordinator says he is, then he'll prove something on the road on Saturday. But I have a sneaking suspicion that's not going to happen. And then finally, before we bring on Connor Riley, let me just quickly mention. So Pete Thamel is now focusing on, he gave you like 50 names for the Tech job the other day, now focusing on 2 names for Georgia Tech. And this is just one guy's opinion. but he's talking about Alabama offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien and Coastal Carolina coach Jamie Chadwell. So saying that maybe those two names are the best possible fit. You'll remember that O'Brien once worked at Tech as an assistant, so there's a little bit of a tie there on that. You should also know that Georgia Tech doesn't currently have an athletic director, so making too bold a proclamation about who the next coach there might not be all that smart, just given the fact that the person that's going to hire that new coach hasn't himself or herself been hired as of yet. But Thamel, who recently gave you the names of McClendon and Monken and Del McGee for the Tech job, now kind of focusing on two names. Maybe it's O'Brien and maybe it's Chadwell from Coastal Carolina. On the Alabama part of this with O'Brien, if you believe the rumors in Tuscaloosa, Nick Saban might do everything in his power to help Bill O'Brien get that job, because I don't know that Bill O'Brien's necessarily Nick Saban's favorite offensive coordinator, but nonetheless, that's the rumor that's out there. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on our program, shocking breach of protocol, doing a Kroger Fresh Take on a Thursday, but it's actually a great time to catch up with Connor Riley about the comings and goings in Athens here this week as Georgia gets ready to take on Missouri on the road on Saturday. And Connor, kind of every version of this game for me has sort of focused in on how easy Georgia is making it look in kind of true road games going back the last couple of years here. They're not just winning games. I believe they've won 8 consecutive true road games, but they're also winning games in excess of 20 points with regularity. It's just not that easy, Connor, and yet Georgia is making it look easy. Do you think they make it look easy again on Saturday as well?
I do. Part of this is opponent-driven. I think Missouri may end up being the worst team in the SEC this season, especially if they're not going to have Luther Burden, who is questionable for this game and I think is undoubtedly their best player. But to the road dominance, they have one road loss since the start of the 2019 season, and that came at Alabama in a COVID year. Yeah. So I think it speaks to the sort of mindset that this team has of, hey, we like going on the road, we like going into your stadium and just beating the stuffing out of you. That's what happened against South Carolina. I think that's what you saw. I think that's what you're going to see happen in Missouri on Saturday. And, that mindset, it makes the performance against Kent State this past weekend, I guess, all the more perplexing of, the Georgia team seemed a little bored playing a noon kickoff against a MAC team when they know, hey, we've got SEC games coming up. We've got big-time rivalry game against Auburn the week after Missouri. So I think you're going to see a fully locked-in and engaged Georgia team really just try to take it to Missouri for 4 quarters.
So I told this to Terrence Edwards a moment ago. Here's why I think the game kind of matters to me a little bit, in that it's Game 5, and in 2 of those games, Georgia's looked like the best team in America. I don't think there was anyone capable of playing better than Georgia played against Oregon, against South Carolina. Samford and Kent State, less than that, but we would say, that's the circumstances. They kind of speak to why Georgia seemed uninterested. Well, if you get some sort of sleepwalky type performance on Saturday, Connor, at that point, you've actually got more bad games than good games. And so I think it would be appropriate for the hype to kind of get dialed down on Georgia a little bit if that were the case. I'm like you. I don't think that's the way this is going to play out. I think this game is going to kind of belong on the same shelf with the South Carolina performance and the Oregon performance. But if for some reason that doesn't happen, then the way I think about Georgia probably would evolve a little bit, and I think it probably should as well.
Yeah, if they sleepwalk through this Missouri game like they did against Kent State, they're not going to be the number 1 team in the country in either of the polls. I think Alabama is going to pass them this weekend, provided that they beat Arkansas, which I do still expect to happen. And so I think this is a chance to really see, okay, as you're getting into the meat of the SEC schedule now, from here until the November 26th game against Georgia Tech, you have, I think, 7 straight SEC games. This is the real meat of Georgia's schedule here. And I think this is going to allow them to show what kind of team they are. They played their A game against South Carolina. They played their A game against Oregon. You come out and play 3 A games in your first 5 games, all against Power 5 opponents. That's in reality probably who you're going to be as a team, because you're just playing more Power 5 opponents on your schedule than a Samford and a Kent State. And so if you go out there and you show that you are, in fact, this juggernaut, this ultra-efficient offense that has only punted 1 time against Power 5 opponents, with Stetson Bennett in the game this year, in reality, that's probably who you are, and I think we could start to consider those Kent State and Samford performances as much more outliers than what we have seen so far.
Off the top of the show today, I kind of put on my Vince McMahon style hype man hat and tried to generate as much possible interest as I can in this game on Saturday, kind of going back to last October when Eli Drinkwitz talked a little trash on Twitter after the Luther Burden commitment to Missouri. Now, the two teams have played since then, but nonetheless, if you want to make this game more interesting, kind of viewing Drinkwitz as a little bit of an enemy here. We have seen Kirby have a little bit of a long memory before. I don't think he tried to run the score last year against Missouri, but given the chance to tack on the extra points, it wouldn't surprise me if he did that on Saturday. And at the very least, I do think it's nice for Georgia fans to sort of think, hey, Drinkwitz, who otherwise is kind of a nondescript coach, he did once try to spike the football on you after a rare recruiting win. So, Connor, at this point, I'll do anything I can to make this game seem more interesting, and that's the card that I'm playing right now.
Yeah, I think Drinkwitz is good for this league. It just kind of stinks that he's at the Missouri job because that's a really tough place to win. I think if you put him in a spot where he has a little bit more access to talent, because he's shown he can be a recruiter, I think he's a good figure to have in the league. Obviously, he did the sort of dorky, lightsaber thing against Florida last year and leaning into that a little bit. But I think, he's a good guy to have in this league. Unfortunately, I don't know how long he is for this league just because of, sort of what the Missouri job has become as they get your 6, 7, 8 into the SEC now. And the reality is, those first two SEC titles back in 13 and 14 are just so long ago now that in reality, Missouri, they're struggling to get to where, say, Kentucky is. And so long as Kentucky, I think, occupies that spot in this league, especially in this SEC East Division, I struggle to see how Missouri is really going to become a factor in playing games against, say, the Georgias, and then ultimately when we get to a new SEC, the Alabamas, Oklahomas, and Texas, not Texas, but Oklahoma, Georgia, Alabamas of the world.
So lingering issues for Georgia. You got A.D. Mitchell at the wide receiver spot. I guess to a certain extent, Arian Smith may come back too. Jalen Carter hasn't played a ton, it doesn't seem. Mikael Williams has played, but maybe there's some chatter out there about him. Kenny McIntosh leaves the game on Saturday. I don't mean to throw 1,000 things at you, but just kind of give me as clear sort of a snapshot of the injury situation for Saturday as you can.
I don't expect A.D. Mitchell to make the trip. I think he's going to be back for the Auburn game. If I had to lean away, I would say they maybe do try and travel Arian Smith. And the thing to keep in mind here is due to the SEC roster limits where you're only allowed to bring 70 guys, if you're traveling, odds are you're probably playing. So, I think Arian has a decent shot to make the trip for the first time all season. Jalen Carter is going to play. It sounds like he is much closer to where he was earlier in the season than what we have seen out of him in the last two games. There's some conflicting reports out there on Kenny McIntosh and his availability for this Saturday. I'm leaning towards him being out there and them having him, though I don't think they're going to use him quite as much as they have this point in the season just because they do want to manage his workload. And also I think they're eager to see what Dejon Edwards can give them going forward. Michael Williams is still playing. He played, 15, 20 snaps against Kent State this past weekend. I expect everything to be good there. And I think that's everybody you asked me about. Is there anyone obvious that I might be forgetting? I mean, I guess we can talk about the star position. And there's the question of what Georgia's going to do there. I touched about that in our Give Me Five, which you can read on DawgNation or see on the video on our YouTube page. But I think, Javon Bullard should be suspended. You can't do what he did, blow .14 and drive home and get a DUI like that and not face some consequences for it. He needs to be suspended. I think 2 games is probably what he will ultimately end up be getting there.
Because that's what the policy used to be, right? Am I factually correct on this, that it's not currently stated specifically how much time it would be, but in previous days, kind of, I guess, pre-Kirby, going back to the Richt era, this would have been a 2-game suspension. Am I factually correct on that?
Yes, in the Richt era, for a first-time offense, it was 20% of the season, which essentially works out to 2 games there. So that was what it was. Under the new Kirby guidelines, it's a little bit more vague. There's a committee, and then they have a hearing, and it goes ultimately to the athletic director to decide the punishment there. And obviously, Georgia keeps this all very under cloak and dagger and lock and key to say we're going to handle it internally to have some leeway there. Without Bullard out there, then I would hope that he doesn't make this trip and doesn't play, because I do think it's a very bad look if you don't have him face any sort of real consequences for this. I expect them to put Chris Smith as your starting star and then have Dan Jackson and Malachi Starks as your safeties there. I think they're going to work in Tyke Smith there, but I'm not quite sure they fully trust him yet to play a full game out there at that star position, as he is still making his way back from a knee injury he suffered not even a year ago.
I think that's a really interesting evaluation, Connor. I got one more thing I want to ask you about. Let me remind folks before that, though, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley. We're getting ready for Halloween here coming up at Kroger, so go to Kroger.com/Halloween. You can find out about all the great savings, up to 20% off on the decor and the candy and all the fun stuff that makes Halloween so great. Trust me when I tell you, when you got young kids like me, we've been in Halloween season at our house for weeks. It's not even October yet. We've already been heavy into the Halloween stuff. And as you kind of move into that in your own life with your own kids, your own family there too, the place to get stocked up on everything you need is right there at Kroger. Get all the candy you need. Some of that you eat before the big day. Some of it you save for the day itself. But either way, Kroger.com/Halloween for a lot more on that. All right, Connor, let me bring you in as well to kind of close out today on a conversation I was having earlier on the show, and it relates to the red zone stuff with Georgia, kind of national average in red zone touchdown percentage a year ago, kind of outside the top 60 here right now. It's an issue that Smart has openly said they want to be better at, converting those trips inside the 20 into touchdowns. I'll also tell you this. I'm not quite so sure sometimes how much red zone stats actually mean. Some of it can feel a little bit random, but it is an area in which Georgia can be better, and I am pretty confident that I don't think you're going to run your way to success in the red zone. That's something that Kirby talked about here this week. He knows more about the subject than I do, but I don't see teams just kind of pounding it into the goal line inside the 20 because it's easier to defend running plays down there, and the opposing defense could have a better idea of what's coming. Georgia's power running numbers probably aren't ever as successful as some people think they might be. To me, it's about how creative can you be with Stetson Bennett, how accurate can his throws be, how much can he do with his own legs, because quarterback runs are far less easy to sometimes predict, and they become more efficient because of that. You're a smart guy. What do you diagnose about what's going on with Georgia in the red zone and how it could get better?
Yeah, I mean, you hear it all the time, but it's harder to score down there because the field is more condensed. And we'll even look back at Alabama last year. A big reason they lost in the championship game was because of the struggles they had in scoring touchdowns in the red zone. And before I hear you say, and you obviously won't say this, but I'm sure there are some Alabama fanboys in your YouTube message boards chatter saying, "Oh, we didn't have Jamison Williams and John Mechie." If you even go back to the SEC championship game, a lot of those touchdowns weren't scored in the red zone, and they came on big explosive plays. And so I think that's why you hear coaches sometimes, especially Kirby Smart, harp on the importance of those, because it is just easier sometimes to rip off a 60-yard touchdown, as we saw Brock Bowers do this past weekend, than it is necessarily to pound it in there. I think, part of the thing that I've liked what I've seen so far is that when Georgia gets in a goal-to-go situation, they've been willing to get creative in sort of how they go about scoring, whether it be Stetson Bennett rushing touchdowns, Brock Bowers on an end around, Ladd McConkey has a rushing touchdown there as well. So I do think that you've seen enough there to where, Todd Monkey can get into his bag of tricks and be creative there. The other one thing, and I touched on this also in the Give Me Five story I wrote this morning, Darnell Washington does not yet have a red zone touch, and obviously you don't want to feed him necessarily in the red zone, but I think when Georgia absolutely needs a red zone score like they're going to, I think at some point this year, they do have him. They have a guy like Brock Bowers. I think Kenny McIntosh is a guy that can score and create plays in the red zone. And one thing, I'll be interested to see going forward the uses of Dejon Edwards. He's really impressed me so far this season, and he's just a tough guy to bring down. And while he's not as big as Kendall Milton is, he is Georgia's hardest runner. And I do think that maybe if you put him in some of those goal-to-go situations, some of those, near the end zone situations, maybe you see a little bit more rushing success in terms of converting, those field goals into touchdowns there. So I do think Georgia still has some cards to play there as far as what they have. But I also point out a lot of the red zone misses, they're games against Kent State and Samford where Georgia, I think, is pretty clearly trying to do things and figure things out and say, okay, can we get the ball to Marcus Rosemary-Jack St. here, and can he make a play for us in the end zone? Can we get it to Karis Jackson? They haven't had A.D. Mitchell in these situations. And so I think we'll – go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You finish your point. I didn't mean to cut you off. Finish your point.
Yeah, and so I think when they, sort of get their full complement of weapons back, which I am expecting for the Auburn game to be the case, obviously knock on wood that nothing bad happens this weekend, I do think that maybe you're going to see these numbers tick up a little bit here.
And I would also add to that, going into the season, I said, hey, if Georgia wants to be better offensively, improving in the red zone is the best place for that to happen. As it looks through 4 games, that's a third of the regular season. There's a chance I might have been wrong about that because, Connor, the fact is Georgia is offensively better right now than it was last year, and that improvement has not yet come in the red zone. The overall numbers through 4 games similar to what it was for a 15-game season last year. So I guess the addendum to all this is that it is possible to be a great offense without being great in the red zone, and maybe Georgia's just going to be one of those examples here this year if this same trajectory continues for the next 11 games.
Right, and the example I want to use there is that 2019 LSU team because, as great as that offense was, what Joe Burrow did best were those 15 to 25-yard throws. By definition, a chunk play, but obviously not the explosive, super long touchdowns. And they just ate you up, picking up, 16, 21, 16-yard plays pretty consistently with their passing offense. I think Georgia's shown the ability to do that right now. And obviously, I'm not comparing Stetson Bennett to Joe Burrow, but I think offensively with the skill talent that Georgia has, they have guys that can consistently win in those intermediate quote-unquote routes, and that's why you've seen a lot of success on this offensive side of the ball this year and why I think you're going to continue to see it this Saturday against Missouri.
Connor, great stuff. Thanks for being here for this Kroger Fresh Take. Looking forward to traveling with you to Columbia, Missouri there this weekend, and we are going to have a good time there in the Show Me State, and I will talk to you then.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
All right, good stuff there from Connor Riley. Let me give you a note here. Speaking of travel to Missouri, longest regular season road trip for the Dogs here this year that presents some logistical challenges. And for me, one of those is needing to fly tomorrow morning against what would normally be the backdrop of our show. So here is how we're clearing that up for tomorrow. This afternoon, as I speak to you on a Thursday, we're going to record the show to air tomorrow. It's not a best-case scenario, but it's also not like we're recording it 18 days in advance. It's essentially the same stuff we would talk about live on Friday morning. We're just going to simply talk about here on a Thursday afternoon. It's still Jeff Sintel. It's still all the things that you've kind of come to expect. But it's going to be pre-recorded today to air tomorrow. That means no 1st and 15 tomorrow, and no typical live cool down when it's all said and done, when the show is completed. But we will look forward to having the show tomorrow, just not live, pre-recorded, as I will be in the air on my way to Columbia, Missouri, and then joining you live on game day, both before and after the game, providing coverage of another, we think, big win for the Dogs on the road as they go for 2 in 22, making a push towards a national championship. Looking forward to seeing 2 fingers in the air, by the way, in Columbia on Saturday, and lots of hashtag go for 2 in 22 all over social media there, too. We'll see you then. And as we wrap up here today, golden shoe time. I saw where Cordell Patterson, Atlanta Falcons do everything offensive star, former Tennessee Vol. I guess he wins a bet here against the former Gator, Kyle Pitts. Now, I don't know how I feel about this from a number of fronts. I don't know that, football players should be doing, the friendly bet where you have to wear the other team's garb and gear. I don't know. That just seems unbecoming here a bit. Plus, for the Falcons, it's like this past Sunday, for the first time all year, they found out a way to use Kyle Pitts. I sort of want them to stay focused on that. You can keep showing that. I want to see them sort of stay focused on that more so than playing these fun games. But Cordell Patterson showing off Kyle Pitts wearing the checkerboard orange and white overalls here after the Tennessee win. So pretty funny stuff. I guess Kyle Pitts got a good sense of humor about all of that. And more spoils coming to Tennessee after their big win. We'll give out golden shoes on that front. Remind you, speaking of Kyle Pitts' alma mater, those lousy, stinking Gators, 5,012 days. That's how long they've been kind of living in the drought of a national championship. Long time for them. And 31 days from right now, maybe 30 days from right now, but 31 days from right now, Dogs back in Jacksonville looking to beat up on Florida again. That is our Gator Hater countdown. Hashtag go for 2 in 22. Dogs got big goal, big mission. We'll talk to you about it again tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time, do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. All right, we'll get your comments here. We're not going to go super long today, I must apologize for, on the forefront, just because we've got some stuff going on here. Okay, so I guess we were late getting on YouTube today. So apologize for that. If you were late joining us here on YouTube, apologize. A little bit of a mishap there on that. So hopefully folks late getting on there. So if you missed part of the show, you want to go back and see it again from the beginning, you can. Can we load the full show to YouTube? Is that possible to do? It's not possible to load the full show to YouTube? All right, so there you go. Well, I mean, people aren't going to do that. That's fine. Let me just focus on this. But yeah, if you're late getting there, sorry about that. Appreciate that. Let me get some, since YouTube folks were late getting on, let me get some YouTube stuff going here. We'll do comments on that side first today. I was going to do Facebook because I haven't done them in a couple days, but since we were, had a little bit of a mishap on YouTube, we'll go there. Spencer Clark pointing out that the Missouri defense leads the nation in sacks, which is concerning. Fair point. I'd also say that after 4 games, you've seen teams playing wildly different schedules, and a lot of statistical stuff is going to stabilize. Between week 5 and week 8 or 9, you're going to see a lot of stabilization, I guess that's the word, of the stat stuff here. For instance, like Kansas in the top 5 in scoring nationally right now, we would assume they don't stay there all year long. Now, Kansas has been kind of a pleasant start, off to a good start here this season, but that's not likely to last. And so when you played Abilene Christian, when you play Louisiana Tech, when you play teams like that, you do have a chance at more sacks. Now, you may say, well, BA, they also got sacks against Kansas State and Auburn. Well, then that might be something worth noting there. But we are in a period of time in which stats are going to greatly stabilize. And Georgia's a part of this too. The Georgia rushing attack either gets better, the Georgia sack numbers, maybe they improve. But on the other side of that, hey, maybe a Georgia team that's been easily scoring in excess of 40 points, maybe eventually Georgia kind of settles into an offensive rhythm a little bit more similar to what it was last year. That if you care about stats and things like that, you see crazy stuff at the beginning of the year, and as more data comes in, some of that stuff gets a little less crazy. Last week, Michigan, for instance, first time for Michigan playing Power 5 level competition last week. They had been highest scoring team in the country coming into the game. Let's see how well they maintain that. They've already dropped down a little bit. Let's see how well they maintain that, just knowing that for the next few weeks, they're playing a very different level of competition. Antoine Sampson, appreciate you being here. Jerry Dogfan said he met Jeff Sintel in Moultrie last night. I'm glad to hear that. That's awesome to hear. Let's see what else is going on. Wyatt Fielden predicting Kendall Milton to have a great game on Saturday. That's fun to consider. Dr. James Cassidy says, how about putting Eric Gilbert at running back? We've talked about the idea that Brock Bowers might play running back. Dr. Cassidy suggesting, what about that for Eric Gilbert there as well? Fun to consider that, and we'll see. When Gilbert is back, contributing again in a big way for Georgia. Senior Dog 54 says, I get my caffeine from a can, and he mentions the soda that he likes to drink. I like soda too. I will tell you this: as someone who likes soda and someone who drinks coffee in the morning. Now, listen, you should consult your own doctor for your own medical needs. The jolt, the kick you get from soda ain't nothing like coffee. Coffee is a entirely different world in terms of waking you up and firing you up and getting ready to go. Now, maybe it's good for you, maybe it's not. Honestly, it's not my place to say. I just simply don't know. But if you want to be awake, if you want to be rocking and rolling, what you get from coffee is way stronger than what you get from soda, I believe. Let's get some Facebook comments here too. Let's see how folks over at Facebook are doing. On Facebook, Randy Hall wondering about some silent commits. Samuel Mpemba, one of the names that he mentions. Mpemba has reported this week, not reported, he just tweeted. He's not Edward R. Murrow. He tweeted that he's actually going to attend the game for Georgia against Missouri on Saturday, which is kind of an interesting thing to consider. So I don't know that Mpemba is a silent commit. Sometimes the definition of silent commit I find to be a little vague, but it seems like Georgia may be in a pretty good place there on that. Seems like Georgia may be in a pretty good place indeed. David West, glad to have you here. Ryan Walker says that Gilbert could be Georgia's version of what Cordell Patterson is for the Falcons. That's an interesting consideration. Let's see what else is going on. I guess some folks in here talking about some of the damage already being detected via the storms that have been rolling through. Yeah, some of the videos we've seen have just been horrific, and it's just awe-inspiring how intense the weather can be. And I don't know, you're just reminded of just how, I guess, small we all are in relative comparison, because when you see those huge waters flowing and the intensity of the winds and all of that, you're just overwhelmed by it. Miriam Corbin and Jerry Popham talking about Darnell Washington in the red zone. Jerry saying back to Miriam, who brought it up, you're spot on. Every time we were close, spread big O out and throw the ball high into the corner of the end zone. The other team, all in the stands, and the entire Army knows what's about to happen. Yeah, I mean, obviously he's a big target, and that's kind of what we said before. It's like, to me, quarterback skill set for great success in the red zone. Got to be good with your legs. Got to be, your most accurate throws. And, you saw the one play that could have been a touchdown to Darnell against Samford. I think that Stetson had a great year, but that's an example of a throw that, that's a little bit different than Darnell probably does catch that. SEC championship, the losing effort, goes up high and gets the football, and you want to see more of that. He seems to be that red zone weapon, but there's a level of precision required. You got to have guys that run precise routes. You got to have quarterbacks who make precise throws. And so if you're going to see more of that, there's a little bit of precision, I would say, needed on both sides to make that happen. But when you've got a talent of that level, that would seem to be the place where you can get it. And we said this, the other day. It's like, okay, if you kind of extrapolate out the season that Darnell is having over the course of a full year, he's having the kind of year that a guy like A.D. Mitchell or Jermaine Burton would have had for Georgia last year. That's a pretty good statistical year, two of Georgia's most productive wide receivers. That's the kind of pace that, from a yard standpoint, Washington is sort of on right now. But those guys also had 4 or 5 touchdowns, and right now that's not the pace that Darnell's on. So the wish that we had for Darnell is, can you get him more touchdowns? Can you get him more action down there in the end zone? And what you're speaking of is kind of the same thing. Other comments. Gary Holt says, I hope someone's learning the Todd Monken playbook before he goes back to the NFL. So obviously Gary feeling good about Todd Monken, and why would you not? He has certainly done a great job with this Georgia offense, and you won't get any dispute from me on that. Bobby Ryle says, do you think that Kirby and Monken have been keeping things vanilla so the teams can get good film? Would this explain some of the issues with Samford and Kent State? So to me, this is one of those things where, it seems like my entire lifetime, and certainly in the time we've been doing DawgNation, there's always this thought of, well, Georgia's waiting to show its real offense versus whoever. That's why you didn't see much offensively. They're waiting to show the real offense against, whoever. And for the most part, that usually ends up not being true. Now, the real offense that Georgia's currently running is working pretty well. Georgia's averaging more than 40 points per game, and I think 39 is the low mark on the entire season. No, 33 is the low mark on the entire season. So they're in pretty good shape offensively here. And as Connor said, hey, maybe some of the stuff down the red zone was just a little bit of tinkering and was just sort of playing around with whatever. But, I also think that when you see kind of the red zone stuff linger year over year, it's the kind of thing, well, that's a problem that Georgia's had for just longer than just a couple of games against Samford and Kent State. So my long answer is I suspect it's not something that Georgia's got this special collection of plays they're going to throw out later on in the season. I think that they simply want to execute what they do even better as the year goes on. And it's important to appreciate the fact that they're already executing at a higher clip than, for the most part, they ever have offensively. Monken's clearly a big part of that. And if Monken wasn't proving to be as diabolical when it comes to getting Bowers involved in the run game, getting McConkey involved in the run game, unearthing the skill set of Stetson Bennett, then some of the other issues that you think you might notice offensively, they would actually stand as far larger problems. But the success that you have with the other areas is kind of obscuring that, which, once again, a credit to Todd Monken and what he's able to do. Eric Ryan Summers says, hope to give you some championship dog things at the bookstore for Auburn. Eric, that's incredibly nice. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And if nothing else, I'm just looking forward to getting a chance to say hello to you and talk to you there that day. So thanks for stopping by to see us. And for those of you who are going to the Missouri game on Saturday, I'd love to get a chance to see you there too. We've already heard from some dog fans who will be there. So if you are, let's make a plan to either see each other kind of before the game for our Kroger kickoff or after the game for our DawgNation post-game show. Hopefully we can kind of get set up in kind of a public way for that. I would love for you to be able to be a part of that there too. But can't wait, Eric, to see you there at the UGA bookstore for the Georgia game coming up against Auburn. Joseph Kennedy on the subject of Kenny McIntosh. Yeah, we're kind of talking about that a little earlier. I guess kind of unspecified right now exactly what might be going on there with that. Brad Hine talking about Zero the Hero, obviously a reference to a great children's book, and Darnell Washington. We're in that big O number here for these dogs. All right, YouTube again, then we're going to do our final comments. Good guy Ty checking in from Japan. How about that? If you gave me 10 guesses as to what day it is and what time it is in Japan right now, not a chance I'd come close. But I'm incredibly happy to have Ty joining us. That's really nice. Very, very good. Spencer Clark says Darnell Washington is a huge mismatch in the red zone. No way he should be sidelined there for sure. Let's see what else. Antoine Sampson crediting Darnell Washington for some of the success that Brock Bowers enjoyed. That's only something that Kirby's echoed the last couple of weeks, Antoine. Kirby himself has kind of talked about that. Joshua Langford says, what do you think we're going to have less of this season? Punts or touchdowns allowed on defense? That's actually an interesting stat. Georgia's punted twice this year. They didn't punt it all on Saturday. Punted once against Oregon. Maybe they punted a couple times against Samford. That's a really interesting question. Really interesting question. It's 2 touchdowns scored right now, right? One against yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Brandon Griffin says, you think we feed the wide receivers a little bit more on Saturday to send a subtle message to Luther? Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I think the message to a guy like Luther Burden is, hey, look at all the fun that Georgia's having. Now, the issue with Burden is he's probably going to play in Saturday's game, so if nothing else, he's just a guy sort of standing there on the sidelines in all likelihood. But, I mean, the message to a guy like Burden is, hey, look at all the fun we're having. That when you're recruited, like, do you really want to go to a place where you're going to be putting your health, your future on the line for no reason while in college? You know, you'd be lucky to even go to a bowl game. You know, that's the message, and that's kind of where it comes in there. So, yeah, I mean, we heard Tyler Williams talk about the stats he feels like Georgia can put up, but it's also the chance to play in games that matter. You know, big-time players, you know, want to play in big-time games, and that's why Kirby has tried to cultivate bigger, better games for Georgia, because that's what big players want to use as the measuring stick for themselves. And Burden in Columbia, Missouri is never getting that. It was a huge mistake to go there. And whether he knows that now or realizes it later, eventually Luther Burden's going to just probably play somewhere else, because Missouri is not a place that big-time players should be. Let's see what else. Caleb Herto says that Luther's going to take a red shirt, then transfer to Georgia. I don't know, maybe so. I will say that with Brian McClendon on the job, if there was a chance to re-recruit Luther Burden, I do believe you'd get Georgia's best effort in that recruitment. I do. With McClendon on the job, I think he'd take a big swing if he got the chance to do that. Let us see what else. Final comments. So it's 3 total touchdowns scored against Georgia, 1 for South Carolina, 2 for Kent State. So there you go. Richard D says, will Eric travel to Missouri in your opinion? My opinion is probably not. If I had to guess, I would say probably not. And if he does, that's an interesting sign. But I would guess probably not. I know Mike had a story about Eric Gilbert a little earlier this week. A little bit, nondescript from Kirby on the topic. But if I would guess that Gilbert's probably not quite ready to travel to Missouri as of yet, because you only take 70, as you well know. And if I had to guess, I'd say that's not the case. All right, on Facebook, and then we're gone. Brandon Griffin says, where's everybody meeting at Missouri before the game? So I don't know Missouri very well, so I'll try to give an APB on myself when I do get set up for the Kroger kickoff, because I'd love to have you stop by if you can. And I'd definitely like to see you after the game, too, because we've kind of been doing some of those live interactions as part of our post-game show. There's a lot logistically about Saturday I just don't know, and I'm sort of getting the impression it may be a little bit of a mess, but we're going to do our best to make it really, really fun for everybody. Really fun for everybody. Lucy Bowers-Boykin, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Joseph Kennedy wants to see Brock Bowers run it up the middle. He's basically wanting to see him become a running back at this point, which is kind of fun. Bobby Riles cheering for Ladd McConkey to have a big bounce-back game. I think that's a good thing to consider and a nice way to end our show here today. So you do wish him well, all these dogs well, as they return to SEC play on Saturday. We got a fun show for you coming up tomorrow. We'll be recording that today because I'll be traveling during the game. And, of course, live all day on Saturday before and after the game. And then back in our normal spot again on Monday there as well. So no 1st and 15 tomorrow. No live comments after the show, but a really fun, great way to close out the week. And we'll get ready for that then. Y'all have a great day. Thank you for being here on our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. It was actually pretty cool this morning. I literally drove in with a little heat on. It had been a long time since I put the heat on in the car, but cranked on that heat a little bit driving in here this morning. So and get you thinking about heating units in your home. Needing to get that one tuned back up, that furnace, before the cold weather season gets here. R.S. Andrews can get it back to factory fresh specs for you. Get more life out of that unit that somebody's told you is probably old and tired and maybe needs replaced. R.S. Andrews can get you another winter out of that thing. So find them online, rsandrews.com, and they'll do good work for you there on that. Also, check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com. Braves did not make it easy on themselves last night, losing late to Washington. You had the walk-off win for the Mets. And so all of a sudden, that's a pretty big deal in this battle for the National League East, with the Mets coming in here on Friday. Of course, a lot to consider with all of this, both the Braves and the Mets on the field, how weather impacts all of this. I know the Mets had talked about wanting to play a little earlier, move it up. That's gamesmanship on their part. Braves saw right through that, to their credit. Braves trying to hold on and get their true home games with what you imagine is going to be crowds, in excess of 40+ thousand for each of those games, standing room only type stuff. So that's the big weekend coming up at Truist Park. We wish the Braves well on that. And, of course, for all of you, potentially in the path of the storm, that's serious stuff that has far more to do with your own life than just sports. And so we wish you well, and you can get up-to-the-minute weather coverage online, ajc.com there as well. A deeper look at those tech coaching candidates, you want to consider that. That's online for you there too. And it's kind of like that fair season. You get some of those great fairs and festivals going on. You get more information about all the stuff to do around our great state in our region here this fall. AJC.com for that there as well. Y'all have a great day. See you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.